Hello, and welcome back to Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television. I'm Todd Kenny, the editor of Mix Magazine, and I hope you saw that keynote just before between Wiley Stateman and Thomas Dolby, music and effects, quite relevant in today's world, and providing a perfect segue to our next panel, Rebirth of Sound Design, with space and balance at the mix. Those are just words, really. One of the things I'd like to explore is simply these roles. They seem to be blurring a lot. The idea of a supervising sound editor, a sound designer, a re-recording mixer. You've all done all of that. So let's start with you, David. I mean, what is sound design in your opinion?
Well, I personally, I don't like to use the word sound designer so much anymore as a title, because I kind of feel like everyone on the crew these days contributes to the sound design. My dialogue editor will have sound design ideas, and my Foley person, but ultimately my feeling is the sound design is just the extension of the storytelling, and trying to do it in an original and unique way. To a certain extent, that's kind of just how I view our role entirely. On the projects that we do, it's all about storytelling, and if you can find, yeah.
But somebody must take control for the vision as well, right?
Well, yeah, and that's why I like to use supervising sound editor personally, because I feel like everyone's contributing to the sound design, and then it's all flowing through you. And then it flows upstream to other people, and they tell you what they like and don't like, it's all kind of a river with tributaries. It's not. I don't feel necessarily like there's ever one person that's doing the sound design anymore. As the way things have sort of developed personally.
And Glenfield, let's take off on it, because all of you do supervising, and all of you have done re-recording. What's your take on it, Glenfield?
Well, I guess this is why Dave and I get along. I believe in it's a group approach. My job as a supervisor is I'm meeting with the director and hearing what they have to say, reading a script, watching a cut, and then I'm talking to my crew. But at the same time, I've been working with a lot of these people for a long time. So they kind of know what I like, and I trust them to bring new things, that I'm not thinking about. I mean, that's what I think is so great about film in general, is it's really a collaborative medium. Like, no one can do everything. So you have everyone who specializes in something, but I think with computers, the fact that we can do so much more, what your specialty is kind of blends and expands. And it's, if you have a good supervisor, they're accepting of that. I think if you're just clamped down, like stay in your lane, you end up losing out on what someone else has to offer.
Cheryl, in your experience, you do a lot of work solo many times, and some of these times you do have a team, don't get me wrong, but by necessity, you are the designer, the mixer, and such.
Sometimes it depends on the project. Like, we really like to split it up anyway and exchange roles within the team a lot, because it keeps you fresh, keeps you going. And also, I find personally, when I get to the re-recording stage, to the final mix stages, that if I've tried to do it all, the project suffers. So I really, for the storytelling and for the freshness and the approach, I like the collaboration and the creativeness that comes with working on a team personally. So, but my teams are probably a lot smaller, maybe 2 to 3 people. And we do have a shorthand, like Glenfield was talking about, that we've worked, between us for so long that we know our shorthand before us. But I have worked solo all the way through, and usually I'm really tired at the end, and I don't feel like I sometimes give it my best if that's the case. So, so I caution against that.
Matthew, you worked on some high profile projects that have these processes running. What's been your experience on sort of the supervise and the mix? How did it work on Game of Thrones and beyond here?
Well, Game of Thrones, Tim Kimmel was the supervisor on that, and Annalie and I mixed it. But just what everyone's saying, it's definitely a team effort, and to supervise and mix, you definitely need someone on your team that you can trust while you're mixing, and if they need to look for alts or do something, that they can do that. And everybody bringing ideas to it. You have to have one person that is the contact and that has the vision with the director and stuff like that. But everybody is a player. There's no question about it, and you can't do it all. And the project will suffer. But I mean, it's come a long way. But yeah, you just in certain situations, like when you're a designer and you design stuff, especially with the limited mix time that you have now, it's kind of cool to be able to be one of the mixers in the chair or the mixer in the chair, because you only, instead of explaining it to somebody else or to try a bunch of different things, you have to have that focus to move forward sometimes.
In terms of the tracks, I think some of it has changed. I mean, in the relationship between the either editorial and mixing, let's just forget the supervisor role in a minute. Who wants to jump in here on like how that editorial mixing interplay is going these days? You want to start, Glenfield?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, as Matt mentioned, it is nice if you are, say, the effects editor or designer, and you then end up mixing that, because you do know what's coming up. And especially now with the automation that's available to us, we are pre-mixing really as we're editing. So to get to the stage and to know what you've got and that you have that idea, as opposed to just handing it off to someone and kind of hoping for the best, is pretty exciting if you're that person.
But I will say, on one negative to that, I'm sorry to interject. On one negative to that is there's nothing like I love bringing my tracks to another mixer, and then they take it from there. Like, so sometimes being a supervisor and mixer works for the film, works for the project, and sometimes it's best to. Again, for me, it's more time allotted. If you have enough pre-dub time and stuff like that, there's amazing mixers out there that can take your tracks and you're just going, oh, I never would have done that. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Are you sitting beside them, or do you hand them and go away? Just forget
I'm right
it.
next to them. Are you kidding me?
I was just going to say something similar too, actually, because I feel like, there's on a short job when you're on a really tight schedule, there's nothing like mixing your own material, because you can big bang boom. If somebody says, can you lower this or raise this, you know exactly where it is, you know how it was created, what the intention was. But there is something else. There is something nice too when you have multiple people that the material passes through that maybe won't even know what you were intending to do with it, that will sort of be like, oh, I don't know what this is for, but I'm going to do this with it. And then you finally hear it and you're like, whoa, that's not where I was going with it all, but that's so cool, and then you say, oh, and if you're going to do that, maybe I'll do this sound that can go with it, and you get these ideas that build on top of each other. It's always a super cool and exciting thing, but it takes time.
I have one story about that. So I always tell people, I go, when I'm sound designing my own stuff and I go to the mix stage and there's another mixer with me, and I know it's like this offstage alien coming down from the heavens and about to attack. And if the mixer next to me says, "What's that?" then I know I didn't do it right. Right. And I'm like, oh, I need to find another sound. Whereas in my head, if they weren't there, I would have like, of course, it's the alien coming down. Don't you know that? That's obvious. So it's really good to have people to take your sound design and bring it to another level. It really is.
No, I do. I agree with that totally, Matt. My sound designer I work with a lot says the same thing. Like sometimes he can't sit with me because we don't have that kind of time, but he'll listen later and he'll go, I never imagined that you would do it that, you'd mix it that way. And also too, he goes, why did you mute that? And I was like, well, because it didn't work, so it's always a constant like that.
Can I ask, how is your relationship, especially over these, you don't have to restrict it to COVID, but the picture department, has that changed at all over the few years? I mean, in terms of turnovers and such? What's that like today?
Well, I mean, for me, it's the relationship with the picture department's essential. I can't even imagine not having a relationship with them. On Only Murders in the Building, we did this episode where it was from a deaf person's perspective. And so I got on early with a picture editor I've worked with millions of times. And her and I were bantering back and forth with the sound design before we took it to the showrunner and brought it to them. And then once we got it to a place, we took it to the showrunner. They loved it. And then they ended up changing the whole soundscape of that episode based on the sound design. So for me, on anything I work on, I just want to have a fantastic relationship with the picture department for sure.
Which allows you to get in early, which is another key point.
Which allows you to get in early. And to be honest, we're all there for the same reason, to make this story as good as possible. And generally, they love it. You know, I think when I first started out, I was a little nervous of the picture department. I was a little scared of them. Like, oh, I don't want to interrupt them. Oh. Now I'm like, hey, I'm Matt. Here you go. What kind of sound you need? Send me some picture. Let's go.
Is it common these days to get involved early? I mean, what's your experience out there in New York? Is it common, more common, would you say, to be able to make those sound decisions?
It really depends. It depends a lot. Like I have certain picture editors and showrunners and you know, post supervisors that I'm friendly with that will want to bring me in early. And then I'll have other ones that just like, the cut's done and now we're going to hire the sound team. You know? And so you come on and everything's all finished. You know, it kind of goes both ways. I think it really, it's having the prior relationships that makes that possible.
Glenfield, getting involved early. I mean, I think it's key, whatever your role, supervisor, sound designer, re-recording, getting involved early must be a key.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to get involved early is even if you're just feeding sounds that you're picking as opposed to them picking, they get used to it. So it doesn't come up as a shock when you're on the stage. That just helps things go better. But then also you know, the more you talk to them, the more you understand really where they're heading, as opposed to like just getting in, see a door, hear a door. You understand the meaning behind that door. You know, I like to always tell a story. I was working on a Spike Lee film, and back then I was mainly cutting backgrounds. And the effects editor, designer had cut this really heavy door. And I said, dude, this guy's like in a Fleabag motel. Like, why? And he's like, Glenn, he just got out of prison. Do you notice that when he shut the door, the first thing he did was open it? Because in prison, when you shut a door, it locks. So he shut it, he opened it, he shut it, it opened it. So that first slam had to be heavier than the door. And I was like, wow, yeah, right. You gotta think through everything. You know, it's you know, sometimes a cigar is not just a cigar, right? So
Sylvester Stallone's gun needs to be the loudest. Matthew,
Glenfield, I love that story. I love our
so
jobs. Isn't it so fun? Like you do stuff like that, and people
is.
never know, but it's so fun. That's really cool. That's a great story.
These are decisions that you make, and one of the things I've always been impressed with is at what point are decisions made. You know, and the great Walter Murch, I've used this slide many times, said. We were sold digital audio workstations on the promise of more time for creativity. All they've done is delay decision making. Making those decisions early, Cheryl. I mean, at what point in a documentary do you start making audio decisions?
At the very beginning, especially because the documentary, a lot of times they have short, small budgets for sound in the field. And it's really much harder to recreate natural sound in the studio if you have to. And if they could just, you know, capture wild sound as they go, make sure they take more notice about all that as they go. It saves so much time, and you get involved. And you can say, no, let's do it that way. Let's do it this way. And it really helps in the end and lets you tell the story, because it actually, you can make it happen and feel like it was there because it's real instead of something that you've had to create.
And much of the documentary, those decisions that you make are based on the real world, sort of what comes in.
Yeah, and sometimes you really get it wrong because you don't know, because you know you're in a cave all day mixing and not out doing duck hunting or whatever. And so I had a director one time came in and started laughing at me. And I was like, why are you laughing at me? And it was because I had used the wrong species of a duck in the cut. And he had a good laugh over that. So, I mean, that's a totally different world than a lot of y'all, but it's just my world, unfortunately. And then, so those are the decisions. Sometimes it has to be real. You can't imagine it. So the door has to be the door.
Well, let's talk about decisions. I mean, in the role as supervisor, designer, re-record, whatever, the dance between music and effects, what Wiley Statement is fond of calling modulating the conversation. When are those decisions made? You can't wait till the dub stage anymore, can you? With these budgets and this back end, you can't.
No.
I mean, Matthew, let's start with you. I mean, your interplay with music and effects. Where does it begin?
Well,
How should it begin?
Well, for me, again, it goes back to getting with the picture department ASAP. Because, for instance, on this Kurt Warner film, he's in a storm, and when we did the tent mixes, they didn't have a lot of sound, so they used music for it. So I got on, and I that's the first thing I built, because there's enough music in that film with regards to the type of story it is that could play with the sound design. So I immediately started building stuff, sending it to the picture department, and then they started realizing they didn't need music there, and let the sound design do the work. Now, that being said, then we go on the mix stage, and I mean, a lot of it, to be honest, happens on the mix stage for me. I mean, there's certain particular parts that I will say, I know we do not need music here. And I'll build that, send it to them, and hopefully that they agree. But when we're on the mix stage, and a lot of times, to be honest, what I like to do, like Game of Thrones, we were very successful in taking a 20-minute battle and, letting the effects have its moment, then handing off and giving the music its moment, and then coming back for the effects and then melding it somehow. But that takes a team effort. It takes time. And to me, that's what I love about mixing, is making that work.
David, you care to comment on that? And on playing with music and effects?
Tell you, Matthew, I reference how you guys use music in the Game of Thrones a lot, actually, because I think you guys did a beautiful job of not trying to have the music tell the story of the battle, and the effects tell the story of the battle, and the screaming guys tell the story of the battle. And so you're just piling everything on until it's just this chaotic mess and you can't understand what anything is trying to do. You guys did a beautiful, beautiful job of letting this element take over and then letting this element take over. And, I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Well, thank you for noticing, because we cared about that a lot. Because it could have got boring, right? 20 minutes of everything hitting you, especially on that night episode in the last season. I mean, that was 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
But I agree with you. A lot of times it does happen, because I'll have plans about where I feel like it should be effects and where it should be music. But then you get to the mix stage and the new score has come in that you've never heard. And you have to reevaluate on the fly, because suddenly you'll be like, wow, the music is actually really, really good here. And it's doing a great job of telling the story. Let's let it have its moment here. You know what? Here, maybe they didn't do such a good job. So, let's have the effects take a little lead here, You kind of have to, it's what I love about the mix stage, actually. It's very improv. And you have to sort of feel in the moment, like, which element that's coming in is doing the best job for the film. And then and you have to be willing to sacrifice your babies, and say, like, oh, I worked so hard on this, but music is doing it better. Let me pull this way back and let that take over. And sometimes, and willing to just change your plan entirely. It's while I totally agree with the idea that it's the digital workstation has delayed, when we make decisions. It's also made us, allowed us to be bold in making really complicated decisions late in the game that we would never have been able to possibly do before, like completely change how we're going to do it, like at the very last moment,
And I think it allows.
And that's true, David. If I could just add one thing, I tell my editing team, I always say that editing's not done when it reaches the mix stage. That's actually when we just start beginning. because, I mean, I've been on a mix stage where where I've been sound supervisor. I go, oh, this is going to be a music montage or whatever. And all of a sudden I go, where's the music? Oh, we're not doing music. Okay, well, we're going to get to working then. and it's fun, but I do have younger editors that think they're all done and they pat their hands and they go, okay, we're at the mix. I finished. Woo. No. Now we get real.
Does that mean as a supervisor that you sort of need to prepare for flexibility? I mean, when you're designing, when you're supervising, do you build
Absolutely.
that process in, whether through stems or whatever? Yeah. Glenfield, what do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of it is now with automation, we don't have to bake things in like we used to. We used to kind of have to bounce things down and you were kind of locked to them, and then you might have older versions that didn't have so much processing. But the fact that we're doing it as something that we can adjust on the stage, it allows us to be bolder. It does allow us to like do a more radical EQ than we might have, or more verb, or place it somewhere more than we would feel comfortable if we weren't on the stage to do it in our edit room, because we know we can adjust it, which is great.
But you're talking about being able to pull apart and such, not providing them with 25 options. I mean, that would be horrifying at the final mix, wouldn't it?
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, so the thing is, we're not like saying I've got A, B, C, D, and E. What we're saying is, I've got a couple of elements and I can play with the way
They interact.
they happen, not just level wise or panning wise, but I can go in and I can change the EQ. So whereas before we would gently EQ something so we didn't go too far, now we've gone where it's pretty much should be. So now the mixer isn't having to spend time getting something to a place where it plays together.
Right.
We're sending it that way, and then we're just tweaking or changing, but we're not like figuring out how this should sound because we've got 12 elements that are kind of how they should be.
How many tracks were on a typical show? Game of Thrones? Did you make it over 500?
Shows?
Make it over 600? I think providing the flexibility sounds like the key there, right there. And I presume, does your re-recording experience certainly inform your edit in that show and how you behave? I mean, that must be a benefit, right, Matthew? You do both.
Yeah. I tell editors and myself, I go, one day on a mix stage is worth 1 year in an editor room, because you realize what's working, what's not, how a mixer uses the tracks, how it goes with music, what you're trying to say. You start to think about story more as opposed to cool sounds. I mean, being on a mix stage and seeing a mixer just dump one of your 17 rumbles, you go, I guess I don't need 17 rumbles. I only need 2.
Only 2. Yes.
Only 2. David, that dual experience, how would you say that helps you in preparing tracks? I mean,
well, there's no question that when I'm preparing stuff, I have in mind, I'll prepare everything that might be there, but I'll have in mind, this is what I want to hear. And these things, maybe I'm not going to hear at all, but I need to have them in case, like Matthew said, suddenly there's an area that there's no music that I thought there was going to be music, and so I need more layers and more things to create, So I'll have everything and layers of it in case they're like, oh, you know what, I don't like birds. Oh, okay, I've got bugs too, But then I'll have in my mind while I'm editing, this is what's important. This is the thing I'm going to make really good and really stand out and really spend time on. And these other things I'm going to have, and then if we need them, I can work on them and finesse them a little bit more. And if we don't need them, I can ditch them because those aren't the things that are important. They're just the things that are there to sort of add. And I definitely story. Coming back to that, I mean, it's the main thing you learn on the mix stage, that if it doesn't tell the story, it's not helping, and you should just get rid of it.
Yeah. One thing I stress is that it's a mix, it's not a layer. So like if you're really thinking in the scope of layers, like, oh, the sound effects are going to be higher here, or the nat sound or the music, and you're thinking in that that way instead of the overall presentation of the sound, the mix, then that's really kind of not like, I mean, I think about it more as a mix instead of a layer. And so I think that's where you really need to start diving into the total experience as a listener and telling the story as one. Because if really, honestly, if you really can say, obviously in fight scenes in different dynamic situations, but you can really, in doc, if you can really say, oh, wait, all those sounds are just super fantastic. Well, maybe you missed it in the mix. I don't know. I mean, you have to be careful about that.
What is the thing?
Yeah, I think you have also just a special thing, especially you're dealing with Doc Cheryl, in that you want the audience to think that everything they're hearing. I mean, we all kind of want the audience to think that everything they're hearing was recorded on set.
Right.
But for you, it's not a set, it's the real world.
Right.
And if
Right.
things start to sound too good or,
Right.
added, then it kind of makes you doubt the truth of the story you're watching.
Right, it's true.
So I think that's another.
Yeah, I did Let the Fire Burn a long time ago, and that was all archival footage. And that was when noise became the sound palette. So you added in noise so that everything sounded the way it should sound. So yes, I agree with you, Glenfield. It's very, I don't know. It's a different approach because it's a different way of telling a story.
We got time for about one more question, so I'd like to go around the room and sort of say, in your editorial supervising sound design hat, and you walk into a dub stage, what's the first thing you sort of say to a mixer? It's presuming you're in the room. Do you explain your tracks? Do you just let them run? How does that work? Matthew, start it off.
I'll let a mixer do their thing until I get to a point where there's been a discussion between the director, the picture editor, myself, and we did something very purposefully. And I'll tell the mixer, here we're just trying to tell this story, and then I'll give them the creative freedom to help tell that story, and maybe just match what we did, or they take it. But I always like to talk in ideas and story, and then see where it happens, see where it leads.
Cheryl, what do you like to talk? Do you talk ideas and story?
It depends on what the stage is. If it's in the final mix, I just hit play. But if it's we're leading up to it and we're putting everything together, maybe like a premix before the director walks in, then yes, we talk about it and we have a plan for sure, and we create together. But I think there's value in just, is it working or not? And if it's not, it's not. And if it is, then you go with that. And if it's not, you correct and try to create something special.
David, your involvement, I mean, when you walk in and you have that first sort of handoff or discussion with a re-recording mixer, what do you talk about?
When I work as a mixer, I feel like I'm the last person in the show that gets to experience it as an audience member, and so when I'm coming in dealing with the mixer with my material, my feeling is I don't want to tell them anything for the most part, because if it's not obvious to them how the stuff's working, then it's not going to be obvious to the audience too, because nobody gets to tell them anything. The only time I'll sort of do that is if there are things that need to be processed or treated in a way that isn't obvious, like, oh, there's supposed to be something happening off camera, and that there's no way that the mixer know that. Well, he'll understand that later, So like the things that he can't possibly know or she can't possibly know, I'll tell them about that, or the ideas that a director or editor, picture editor have that they want to explore. I'll tell them about that. But for the most part, I feel like the mixer is the last person that can hear something and go, I don't know what that is, And if I tell them, they know what it is, and it kind of ruins it, so that then the audience will be the one that will be going like, what is that? I don't know what that is, So I don't like to spoil it for them too much. I want their honest feedback,
Glenfield, do you like to surprise them, or do you like to take it easy?
I also like to let them do their thing. And I enjoy watching people work. I just feel like, again, it's so collaborative and everyone is so dedicated to doing the best that they possibly can. And it's when I feel that there's something I really want and like they're maybe not getting there, it's like kind of when I'll pipe up. Or if the director or an editor has like made something like this is really where I want to go with this, then I'll make sure that that's where we're heading. I mean, also sometimes I just also feel like I'm an interpreter. For sometimes the director or the editor doesn't really know the best way to talk to the mixer. Or I can see they're like having trouble getting their idea across. So I'll say, why don't we try and go in this direction? But I mean, the thing is, they're sitting in that seat. They know what they're doing. Why stop them?
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Cheryl out of D.C. From Harbor in New York. Thank you, David in Glenfield. Thank you, Matthew. Come join us for more at Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television.